Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder how families use words not just to say what they mean, but to play and teach in a much more complicated way? Well, this new study dives deep into those tricky conversations, especially between parents and their little kids. It turns out that when parents talk to their young children, they don't always say what they actually mean. And this isn't just about telling a white lie. This research looks at how families use something called non-literal evaluative stance, which is a fancy way of saying they use words to give an opinion or judgment in a way that is not straightforward. Think about a time a parent said something like, "Oh, you are so good at cleaning up when the room was a mess." That is the kind of thing we're talking about. The study zooms in on Mandarin-speaking families and their dinner table chats. The big question here is, how exactly do families use these non-literal ways of speaking, like irony and teasing, when they're talking with young children? And how does this differ from just saying things directly? The researchers collected a massive amount of data watching families eat dinner for over 23 hours. They then carefully went through all the conversations, looking for instances where someone said something that wasn't meant literally. Especially when they were offering an evaluation or a judgment, they ended up with over 100 examples of these non-literal evaluations. They broke them down into a few main types. There were cases of strict verbal irony, where what was said was pretty much the opposite of what was meant. And then there were many more cases of what they call non-oppositional teasing. This teasing is playful and evaluative. But it doesn't necessarily mean the opposite of what is being said. It is more about creating a humorous or mock-serious situation. They also looked at who was doing the talking, what they were trying to achieve with their words, and how the children responded. Now, for the really interesting part, what did they find? Well, strict verbal irony, the kind where you say the opposite, was actually pretty rare. Out of all the examples they found, only 8 were strict verbal irony. But teasing, that was everywhere. They found 97 instances of teasing. This means teasing was about 12 times more common than strict irony in these family dinners. Teasing happened about 4 times an hour, while strict irony was less than once an hour. And who was doing most of this talking? Mostly the adults. Parents and grandparents produced almost all the strict irony and most of the teasing. The children themselves only produced a few instances of teasing, and none of the strict irony. This suggests that adults are the main ones introducing these playful, non-literal evaluations into the conversation. When children did tease, it was often in response to something an adult had said, like they were joining in on a game that was already happening. So how did they tell the difference between strict irony and teasing? Strict irony, they say, requires you to understand that what was said is the opposite of what is really happening, or what is expected. For example, if a child spills food and a parent says, "Wow, you are so tidy," that is irony because the words clearly clash with the messy reality. Teasing, on the other hand, is more about playful exaggeration or assigning a funny role. Think of calling a child who is carrying dishes a little porter. It is playful, it is evaluative, but it doesn't require understanding that the child is not a porter. It is about framing the action in a fun way. Here is another key finding. Teasing isn't just about fun and games. While a good chunk of the teasing was for affiliative play, meaning to have fun together, almost half of it was actually used for behavioral regulation. That is a big deal. It means parents are using this playful, non-literal language to guide their children's behavior. For example, a parent might playfully rank a child's eating speed as last place to encourage them to eat faster. The playfulness softens the instruction, making it easier for the child to accept. It is like a gentle nudge disguised as a joke. When the children did tease, it was almost always in response to an adult's comment. One example showed a mother saying a child doesn't need to be fed because she can eat herself. The child then responded, "Do you think I don't have hands?" with a bit of a playful challenge. This shows children often jump into these teasing games already started by adults. They're learning how to participate by adding to what is already there, rather than creating the whole game themselves. This is a really important idea. Children might be learning to tease and use irony by first responding to and building upon what adults say. How did people respond to these different types of talk? When adults used strict irony, the children usually either complied with what was asked or didn't seem to react much. But when they were teased, the reactions were much more varied. There was a lot more laughter, playful denials, and even serious denials or protests. This suggests that teasing, because it is more playful and less confrontational than strict irony, opens up a wider range of possible responses and interactions. Interestingly, the researchers found that there weren't really specific words, tones of voice, or gestures that only meant irony or only meant teasing. Both types of talk use similar tools like playful voices, rising intonation, exaggerated stress, smiles, and gestures. This means that understanding whether something is ironic or teasing relies a lot on the context of the conversation. What happened just just before and the relationship between the people talking. Not just on a single cue, it is the whole package that tells you what is going on. So, what is the big takeaway from all of this? Well, first off, this study shows that when we talk about how children learn language, we need to look beyond just direct language and simple praise or criticism. Non-literal language, especially teasing, is a huge part of how families communicate and socialize young children. The fact that teasing is so much more common than strict irony suggests that this playful, slightly indirect way of evaluating things is a really important tool for parents. The finding that teasing is frequently used for behavioral regulation is fascinating. It tells us that parents are skilled at using humor and playfulness to guide their children without making them feel overly criticized or lectured. This playful norm enforcement is a really effective way to teach rules and expectations. It is like making medicine taste like candy. It makes the potentially difficult task of correcting behavior more approachable and even enjoyable for the child. The observation that children's teasing is often responsive rather than initiated also leads to an interesting hypothesis. It suggests that children might be learning to participate in these complex communication games by first observing, responding to, and extending what adults do. This interactional scaffolding idea is powerful. It implies that children build their skills by engaging with what is already happening around them, gradually becoming more independent in their use of these linguistic tools. It is not about them suddenly knowing how to be ironic, but rather learning through participation. The fact that both irony and teasing use similar multimodal cues like tone of voice and body language means that understanding these nuances is a complex skill. It is not just about hearing the words, but also about perceiving the whole picture, the context, the speaker's demeanor, and the shared understanding between participants. This is a huge area for developmental psychology, as it shows how children learn to read these subtle social and linguistic signals. Now, like all research, this study has its limits. The researchers themselves point out that strict irony was quite rare, and they only found a handful of teasing examples from the children. This means that any conclusions about children's development of these skills are more like interesting starting points for future research, rather than definitive answers. Also, they studied families at dinner time, which is a specific kind of interaction. We need to see similar studies in other settings, with different age groups to really understand the bigger picture. So, what does this all mean for us in our daily lives? It really highlights the richness and complexity of family communication. It shows us that parents are constantly navigating how to teach, guide, and bond with their children, and they use a whole range of linguistic tools to do it. Teasing in particular is a versatile tool that can be used for fun, for teaching. And for strengthening relationships, it reminds us that language is so much more than just literal meaning. It is about social interaction, play, and subtle ways of shaping behavior and relationships. I think this research is super important because it moves us away from just thinking about irony as this one thing children need to understand, and instead opens up a whole world of how kids encounter and use all sorts of non-literal language. It suggests that the focus should be on this broader evaluative ecology that children are a part of. What do you think? Have you ever used teasing to help guide a child or a friend? Or have you been on the receiving end of some clever, playful criticism? Let me know your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more insights into the fascinating world of psychology. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.